Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. We are happy to be hosting Dr. Oby Ezekwesili today. Dr. Ezekwesili was the Vice President of the World Bank for Africa. She was also the Education Minister in Nigeria, and she's co-founder of Transparency International. She has held several other public positions that are relevant for some of the discussions we'll be having today. She has been Minister of Solid Minerals in Nigeria. She headed the Nigerian Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, and she was also at some point at the Center for International Development at Harvard University. She was trained at the University of Lagos, my alma mater, so Greater Cockite, and at Harvard University. So we are delighted to have
the University of Nigeria
and the UNN. Okay, you know why I am emphasizing University of Lagos now. So we are very happy to have her today, and we'll have we'll start with some questions for her from my end. I am Wale Adebanwi. I teach at the African Studies Center at the University of Oxford. I'm also a fellow of the St. Anthony's College at Oxford. So we'll start with a few questions for Dr. Ezekwesili, who most people know in Nigeria as just Oby.
That's what you're going to call me today, right? Just yes. Oby.
Yes. And I should also note that she's been one of the leading campaigners for Bring Back Our Girls, which is an international campaign about the crisis in Nigeria. So after a few questions for Oby, then we would invite people to send questions, and you can send your question, you can type your questions, and then they'll be forwarded to me. So let me start by asking about some of the current challenges in the continent about good governance structures. What would you see as the most crucial challenges concerning good governance in Africa today?
So we would have to contextually recognize that when we say good governance, in order to avoid it being a nebulous concept that people are trying to feel and touch in a tangible way, we have to sort of unpack it and talk about the features of good governance. So if you follow the global norm and definition, it would include things like participatory governance, so where participation exists, meaning that the citizens feel a sense of participation in the process of governance. It would be an environment where you see inclusion. So inclusivity is regarded as part of the characteristics of good governance, meaning that people feel like they are not marginalized, they are not excluded from the process of the development, the governance process of their country. You would say things like equity. So people get a sense of fairness in the way that they are treated. They are not discriminated against either for their local, their ethnic group, their gender, their social status, and all these other things, their religion, and these other things that can create primordial divides. People feel like there is transparency in the way that affairs of governance are conducted. So the right to know, is guaranteed. The citizens feel that what they are saying is exactly what's going on, and that there is no opacity in the way that governance is being given. People feel like no, there is not that they feel that there is accountability. So they believe that those who have been given responsibility, to those that they have accorded legitimacy to by putting in office, would be accountable to them. In other words, they would render a report on how they are utilizing the powers that have been given to them. because in every democracy, people who have voted are holding delegated power of those who voted for them. And so, and even those that didn't vote for them, because they don't exist just for those that voted for them. And so all of these features go together to create the sense efficiency is a part of good governance. So things would be done in an efficient way to ensure that there's optimization in the use of resources, because resources are finite, right? And especially on our continent where we have resource gaps, whether the resource is defined as technical resource, knowledge resource, financial resource, even natural resources resource, or human capital resource. So all of these things work together toward forming a momentum for whether governance delivers results. And so when we talk about good governance, there's almost a normative kind of definition of it, in the sense that you're expecting that anything that is good would lead to a good outcome. So good governance should give you the kind of results out of governance that would enable improvement in the well-being of citizens, which is often the raison d'etre of every government, whether they be of advanced economies or they be of emerging economies or low growth economies. What governments exist to do is to improve the quality of life of their citizens.
Thanks.
So,
Go ahead, please.
So in saying, what are the structural gaps on our continent today as far as all of these features are concerned? Well, let's just take an indicator. When you look at the indicator on our continent in terms of the competitiveness of our continent, against other regions of the world, we're lagging behind. And in the measurement of competitiveness, the indicators that go into that measure really focuses on a number of these features that I talked about. And so if we're lagging behind other continents of the world, then there is a problem. I'll take a particular measure, the one that I am associated with by virtue of the introduction that you gave, that I'm a co-founder of Transparency International. The Corruption Perception Index is a good governance measure, right? And the 2021 shows that our continent scored an average of 32 out of a possible 100. So we're the lowest scoring region, in the Corruption Perception Index for 2020. Our country, Nigeria, scored 25 out of a possible 100. And so if you look at the neighborhood where most of the countries on our continent find themselves on the global rankings of indices that measure good governance, it tells you that we do indeed have a problem. And these problems are very structural in nature. And the structural problems would have to be given structural solutions. And I hope we get into that as we discuss.
Thank you very much. Yes, much of what we hear about the continent concerning governance are often negative. Do you think there are some, success stories, achievements, and examples of good governance and partnerships on the continent? What would are there, examples that would constitute sharing news about governance in the continent?
So, there are successes. There are successes. I think that the number one big success for me is that usually I take an economic lens into the matter of good governance. And so I look at good governance from the perspective of the demand and supply side of good governance. And so the demand side of good governance for me is basically about the people for whom good governance governance is meant, right? The ones who need good governance, the consumers of good governance, that is the citizens, right? The good thing on a broad basis, the good thing that we should say is going on the continent is that there is much more voice of citizens. I mean, the level of engagement of citizens in issues of governance that across the continent is so heartwarming. You know, I mean, because of aberrant political systems and processes that existed, you know, when coups and despotic regimes that were, you know, just democracy in name alone existed, was such that the citizens didn't even understand what it meant to demand for accountability. They saw no evil, knew no evil, and spoke no evil. So, but today there is a wave, there's a momentum that's gathering where especially the young people and more increasingly women as a category are demanding for improvement in the way that they are governed. So the demand side of governance is building up into a system, and you need such a systematic, existence of such demand in order to push the supply side into a certain kind of behavior. So, and then when you look at the supply side, you find that the fragility of democratic institutions on the continent has not improved as fast as they should improve. And that takes us to the questions of why are these improvements not happening as fast as they should? And it was a question that took me to a place where I had to go look at the impact that politics has on governance and economy and citizens and every other thing that you can imagine. And I saw such a strong nexus between the nature of politics on our continent and the quality of the governance that is offered by the supply side of governance. So on the broad side, improvement in terms of more engagement of the demand side, the citizens, their voice, their demand for, and their pressure, their activism. That's very good. On the specific side, if you said, which some of the countries like Cape Verde come to mind in terms of the kinds of score you see them have, or a country like Mauritius, or a country like Botswana, you know, and then at a certain level, countries like Rwanda do well on some of the scores that have to do with issues of, accountability, efficiency in the use of resources. Some of these, producing results, you know, in some areas of governance. You see that some of these countries are standing out. A country like Botswana is a great case of an African country that bucked the trend of the Dutch disease that is common to countries, the two-thirds of African countries that have natural resources endowment as the mainstay of export and export revenue for their countries, right? So you can cut across and look at countries and identify in certain cases where they are quite doing well and representing the continent better as not a basket case of poor governance. And then, you can also take a sector-specific approach. So you look at sector-specific approach and you can say bravo to Africa's information and communication technology sector. It's a sector that makes us so proud. I mean, that was the sector on the basis of which, as VP at the World Bank, responsible for the Africa region, I was able to contribute an expert out of Africa coming to be a public good that I could offer to my colleagues in South Asia region when M-Pesa came on board. That innovation of the M-Pesa was amazing. So Michael Stevens, we invited him to become a fellow of the World Bank from the Africa region. And he supported countries in South Asia to look at mobile money and all of those new ideas that were coming as a result of that, of what innovation from ICT or technology more broadly is creating on our continent. If you look at the Nigerian economy today, the ICT sector just happens to be holding up the growth, the little growth that we're seeing. A lot of it, I think 14 point something % of growth is, attributable to the telecom sector. So you can see variabilities in terms of how sectors are performing. The most hideous sector remains the natural resources sector, and that is the sector that is keeping the continent down. That is the sector that our obsessed political class would not let go of. And because that is the sector that gives them all the incentive to perverse governance, it is a sector that can only improve when we're able to push the political process of the continent to go in the direction of better quality of actors in our political space.
Thank you very much. I see that some of the questions I would like to ask are already popping up, but I'll ask one more question before I go to questions from the audience. You have been education minister in Nigeria. Two of the greatest challenges in the continent are the problems of illiteracy and ignorance. How do you think this question of the challenge of education in the continent, because we see, of course, different rates across the continent, but generally when you look collectively, and compare the continent with the rest of the world, it's quite challenging. So what are the things that need to be done by African countries to be able to change, to drive the process, because especially of the connection between education and growth, and of course, good governance?
So the thing is, if you've got lousy politicians, they're not going to care about education. They're going to be more interested in according all the priorities to natural resources segment of society, because human capital doesn't resonate with them. They don't see the immediate translation of everything that's got to do with human development into the quick money that comes through the treasury, through natural resources. And so natural resources, so human capital or human development, more specifically human capital, is pushed to the margins of everything that the political elite in most of African countries do. And that's the biggest damage that is done to the continent. Because number two of my point is that we have looked throughout history, and we find that the fastest way to move from poor to rich is through the pathway of the development of your human capital. Your human resources will power the innovation, the ideas, the creativity, the productivity, the competitiveness that would lead you up the value chain, and then you begin to climb up the economic ladder, like others that have gone ahead of you. So for as long as we don't put that priority to the development of our human resources, we're just going to have a huge population that is low productivity population, low competitive, lowly competitive, population, and that's not a good thing for us now or in the future, because you can see the fragility of our growth because of the lack of resilience of our human capital. Every time there's an exogenous shock of the global economy in the form of collapse in prices of natural resources, our continent catches terrible cold that we take time to recover from. So that's to create this important thing where people assume that, oh, if we shouted loud enough, then people who don't care about education will suddenly care about it. They won't. They have no incentive to care about education. So we must fix our politics in order to ensure that our politics would reflect the urgency that we need for us to put human capital at the center of our development strategy. While we are working on that, however, there are things that we see happening across the continent, and what we see happening across the continent is the greater involvement of other stakeholders. So you're seeing private sector participation in the development of human capital. You're seeing civil society participation in the development of human capital. And we're seeing the build up of advocacy for better policies in education. All of these things have to go together, and then, create a groundswell for the tidal wave of change that is necessary for us to have sound policies in education. So we've done slightly better in terms of improving access, yet we are the continent that is more than 50% of out-of-school children in the world, showing that we're yet to achieve universalization of access to education, right? Basic education even, all right? And then when you look at tertiary education, global average in terms of enrollment ratio to population that should go to tertiary education, that receive tertiary education, is something in the neighborhood of 25%. We are at an average of anything between 8 and 10%, right? So that's, we're so far from where the rest of the world is, whether it's universal education, basic education, secondary education, or tertiary education. So in terms of access, we're struggling. In terms of quality of outcome, meaning what are people learning? My goodness, we are in trouble. The foundational literacy and numeracy skills on our continent is pitiful. Many of in some of the countries, we find that as much as 70% of the children cannot read letters. They cannot read at the level of a 5-year-old, even by the time they are leaving school. That's a problem for us. We must fix it, because the quality of learning, at the foundational level, follows a child throughout life. They struggle to keep up with the rest of their peers around the world, to the extent that they have not learned the basic literacy and numeracy. Then you think in terms of relevance of the education that we're offering. We are the continent that, offers education that's of no use to anybody. And so we train people in the university system, and they come out and they are a sunk cost, because, the market does not recognize what it is that they can contribute. And so we even have sectors that are growing and are needing to expand in terms of the labor, that the skills that they want to attract into those sectors, but they can't find them amongst our own people. So some of these companies bring some funny looking fellows that they call engineers, who are barely, literate. They just have the technical skills because their own country emphasized the necessity to have some technical skills. So we're missing on many sides, but it is nothing that policies, the right sets of policies backed by economic pragmatism, backed by evidence. Empirical evidence is so important. Analytical evidence, randomized, control trials that show us what works, what does not work, interventions that have improved learning. For example, one of the things we know in education is that you can improve every other thing. If you don't improve the quality of the teachers, you're wasting your time. Learning outcomes will not improve for children or for students. So, for education, my goodness, you could get me talking forever.
I understand so. Yes, we have a few questions from the audience. The first question is about youth. How can the youth be more empowered to take on responsibilities today that would ensure future good governance? And relatedly, how do we avoid the apathy towards political institutions that is currently widespread among the youth in Africa?
I want to tell the person who asked that question that the youth already have agency. I understand where that kind of a question comes from, but I don't like to I don't like to affirm it, because this thing of empower us is like removing agency from yourselves. You have agency. The fact that any youth, especially those of you that somehow parents have really tried their best under such hardship, managed to take you through one form of education or the other, to the extent that you have received any form of education, you immediately have voice. Your voice is your agency. You're already empowered. The issue is, are you ready to unlock your voice? And are you ready to build coalitions with your kindred spirits in order to achieve exactly what I was saying about the demand side for good governance? You see, in that whole economic modeling of what governance could look like, for as long as the demand side is weak and it's not functioning, the supply side behaves like a monopolistic market. A monopolistic market is a market where, you know, the seller is the be all and end all. They fix the price. They determine what quality you get. They determine what value. They determine everything. They determine what information is available to you. And so the demand side of good governance could do well to be bolstered by the agency of our young people suddenly saying to themselves, in this time of youth, I've got the voice. I don't need anybody empowering me. I've got to take my space. Your greatest empowerment was given to you by the Constitution that called you the citizen of the country you come from. The office of the citizen that you occupy is the most important office in the land. It is you that has the power to give legitimacy to the supply side of governance. If you don't vote for the president, he does not become president. So the president may be the highest office in the land, but it is your office, the office of the citizen. He may be the highest political office in the land. The president can be the highest political office in the land, but the office of the citizen is actually the highest office in the land. It is what gives legitimacy to the legislators. It is what gives legitimacy to the executive branch of government. Without you, they don't exist. And then in terms of the matter of apathy toward politics, based on my first answer, you can see clearly that you have no business being apathetic to politics. There's no Messiah that is coming to save you in your politics. The truth is, the Messiah has come once and died. He's going to come again, only to take us with him to heaven, for those who like me, believe in Christ, right? But in terms of the faculty given to us to fix our countries, God is just sitting in heaven and looking at Africans, wondering who they are waiting for. Africans are going to have to fix their politics. Politics is not one of the things that God has to come to fix for us. The other countries of the world didn't wait for God to fix their politics. So this apathy to politics, thinking that if we can ignore it, then it can change on its own, it's not true. Nothing happens that is not made to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question focuses on the health challenge that we're facing now. Not just COVID, but health challenges in general. So the question is, does the health crisis, which is coupled with economic and social crisis, risk harming the efforts of African countries in terms of improving governance and inclusive growth? And how do we deal with the risk of institutional regression, particularly in the context of the COVID pandemic?
It's a real concern. It's in fact empirically determined that when countries are facing pressure, sometimes quality of decision, instead of improving, regresses, because people then tend toward the lowest common denominator. Because there's a good excuse for doing that. In the reverse, though, when under pressure, You're supposed to improve your quality of choices because you're facing steeper economic pressure. So your fiscal space is narrowed. And when your fiscal space is narrowed, that should be when you're optimizing in terms of your choice, your policy choices, your budgetary allocation, priorities. Unfortunately, if I based it on what I saw here in terms of our budget, our most recent budget in Nigeria, it didn't show that quality of decision making. So clearly the season of the pandemic has not shown that we have learned the best of lessons that we should learn across the continent in the way that we choose policies. Okay, so economic policies we know are so central to economic growth. You have poor fiscal policies, poor monetary policies, you're definitely not going to grow. And except you grow, then you stand a little chance of reducing poverty. If you don't grow at all, then you're not going to reduce poverty. Although if you grew, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will ultimately reduce poverty to the extent that you desire, because the quality of your growth matters. That's why we often say that growth is a necessary but not sufficient condition for poverty reduction, right? But you must grow. And if we're not getting our people to focus on the right sets of policy choices, whether they be economic policies or they be social policies, we're not going to make the kind of progress that we need to make. One thing that COVID has shown us is that there was a tension, there was a serious tension between livelihood and life. What happened in the case of Africa was that our tension between livelihood and life ended up being something that was dependent on the effect that the global economy has had on us. Because in terms of life, we somehow managed by some divine providence, which eventually research will help us understand better, we managed to not be in the storm of COVID-19. So life has not been as compromised on the continent as we see in many other countries, sadly. Right? But because of the impact of the global economic recession, it has been a pass-through on us, right? Because of the exogenous shock and the fact that we don't have the buffer. We have no buffer against, these shocks. So we're not able to have the kind of deep pocket to carry on with the investments that are necessary in human capital, necessary in building up our health systems and improving productivity across board, and necessary in investing in critical infrastructure. And at the same time, we have not used this opportunity to get our citizens to realize that, wow, we have an opportunity to focus on institutional reforms, on business environment reforms, because frankly speaking, with COVID-19, there's a conversation going on the concentration of the world's production system in one country called China. People are more and more thinking of decentralization of production systems. Africa ought to be making a pitch for it, especially in the light of our Africa continental free trade arrangement, right? But we're failing to understand how to seize the moment. And all of it is coming out of the failure of our political process and system.
Thank you very much. I have one last question to ask because time is almost up. So this question is from Lopa. This person wants to know how proactive has been the role of the media in contributing to good governance in Africa, especially with reference to influencing public opinion towards government policies and bringing to light the instances of maladministration and inefficient public expenditure.
Well, we're all media now. We're all media now. So, traditional media is fighting for its own life. In our country, for example, there's a lot of repressive action against the traditional media. The government cannot do exactly the same to citizens' media. So you see there is citizen media that is open 24/7, right? But some of the traditional media, the mainstream media, have to be careful because they can be taxed for something, they can be fined for something, they can be closed down for something. That whole press freedom that we take for a given in democratic environment is not quite there yet for some of our countries. But the role of the media is so important because some Africa's large population of illiterate people with literacy level that is still below 65% on our continent, it means that we have a large number of illiterate people. They are important for radio, they are important for television, they are important for local language communication in order to activate them into the kind of empowered, engaged electorate that I was talking about, that Africa needs. So we must look at the media and the role that it needs to play as purveyors of accountability, public accountability, as purveyors of the common good, and do something more and more to support the development of the Africa's media.
Thank you very much. I have a 2-minute window for this last question that I'm going to pose. The question is from our audience. What advice do you have for Africans in diaspora who are looking to help engender change back home by participating in issues of governance and innovation?
So they have to analytically determine which sector and sphere of influence their skills would support the continent to grow, right? So there are 3 things that any diaspora can offer the continent. They can offer knowledge, they can offer finance, they can offer partnerships. And these 3 things are crucial for the development process. Each of you would need to not be far away pointing to your country. You need to sort of analytically find what the status of what the state of play is in the different sectors that you're excited about. And then you need to build bridges with the ones who are at home and connect. Because I do say to people that you don't have to come home in order to contribute. Where you are, there is so much that your finance can do. There's so much that your knowledge can do. There's so much that your partnerships can do. So unlock all of this for your continent. And the best of you that would love to come home, people like me would be at the airport to welcome you, because we do need boots on the ground. And the more of you that can come home, the better for us.
Thank you very much.
Come and run for office. Most of you should come home. Run for office and dislodge a parasitic political class in order to provide the kind of governance that we need. The dominant political culture of subordinating the public good to the private and narrow interests of the people that are in our politics is one that needs to be contested. And you are the class that can contest it. So please don't stay away from politics. Otherwise, you'll be ruled by idiots.
Thank you very much for these very illuminating responses to our questions. I think we have to end it here. We have a 1-minute window, I think, just in case you have something that you want to add before we go.
Well, just to say that, I did a research as a Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin, Germany, called Fixed Politics. And out of Fixed Politics, we're doing a number of interventions. One of the key things we're doing is that we've established a school of politics, policy, and governance. It's an unconventional school, but it is raising a new generation of leaders that would run for public office and go into public office with competence, capacity, and character.
Thank you very much. I think everyone in the audience would agree with me that this has been a very, very exciting session. You have provided great illumination to various areas of life in Africa and how these are connected to the issue of good governance and economic growth and development in general. and we really appreciate you. On behalf of the organizers of this event, I want to thank you very much for your time, and I want to thank all the members of the audience. I thank those who sent in questions. I'm sorry there are a few questions I'm not able to take because I'm under authority.
You can send them to me and I will reply them by email.
Okay, I shall do so. So again, thank you very much on behalf of everyone, and thank you all for joining us for this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.